They laughed before I even finished my sentence. Not the nervous kind of laugh either, but the loud, careless kind that fills a room and tells you exactly where you stand. I was 16, standing in a courtroom that smelled like old paper and coffee, wearing a borrowed blazer that hung off my shoulders, and the judge leaned back in his chair like he was watching free entertainment. I remember thinking, wow, this is really happening. I took a breath anyway and said it again slower this time. I want to speak on behalf of my father. Someone in the back snorted. The prosecutor smiled. The judge shook his head and said, "Sit down, sweetheart. This isn't a school debate." That was the moment I realized nobody in that room saw me as a threat. And honestly, that was their biggest mistake. A few months earlier, my life was painfully ordinary. Not the kind of ordinary people put on postcards, but the kind you fight to protect. Mornings started with burnt toast, a broken coffee maker, and my dad humming off key while tying his work boots. He fixed elevators for a living, long hours, bad pay, but he never complained. He'd say, "As long as we're together, we're rich enough." My little brother Eli would sit at the table, half asleep, cereal going soggy, and I'd be reminding him to grab his jacket, his inhaler, his homework. Our apartment was small walls thin, but it was ours. We were surviving, and that felt like winning. Then, one night the door didn't knock. It burst open. Flashlights shouting hands on guns. My dad didn't argue, didn't move fast, didn't do anything wrong. He just raised his hands like he'd practiced his whole life for that moment. They said he robbed a convenience store 2 blocks away. Armed robbery. Assault. I remember laughing at first because it sounded so ridiculous. My dad barely liked confrontation, let alone violence. But the officers weren't joking. When they cuffed him, the metal sounded louder than anything I'd ever heard. He looked at me as they pulled him away and said, "Kiddo, I didn't do this." I nodded, even though my knees were shaking. "I know," I said. "I'll fix it." I had no plan. Just certainty. Visiting him in jail felt like stepping into another world. Cold chairs, thick glass phones that barely worked. He already looked smaller somehow. Bruises he tried to hide. He told me other inmates thought he was something he wasn't, and in a place like that, rumors can kill you faster than truth can save you. "I can't last long in here," he said quietly. That sentence followed me home and sat on my chest all night. People kept telling me to trust the system, to let the lawyer do their job, to focus on school. But the lawyer had dozens of cases and minutes to spare. I had one father. So I started reading. Everything. Police reports, court transcripts, public records. Late nights at the library, highlighter ink on my fingers, eyes burning, but brain wide awake. I noticed things that didn't add up. Times that shifted depending on who was talking. Witness descriptions that changed. A lineup photo where my dad was the only person who looked like him. I didn't know much about the law, but I knew stories. And this one felt forced, like a bad script everyone agreed to perform. At the same time, real life didn't pause. Bills stacked up. An eviction notice showed up taped crookedly to our door. Eli's asthma got worse from the stress. One night, while he was asleep on the couch with his inhaler in his hand, I realized something uncomfortable. Nobody was coming to save us. Not because they were evil, but because they were busy, tired, overwhelmed. That's when I decided I wasn't asking for permission anymore. When I brought my notes to my dad's public defender, she looked exhausted. She skimmed, at first polite, but distracted, then slower. Then she stopped completely. "Where did you get this?" she asked. I shrugged. I read. I showed her the contradictions, the timelines, the work logs that proved my dad was somewhere else. I even found an obscure rule that allowed a family member to assist in defense under special circumstances. She warned me the judge was known for being cruel, that he'd humiliate me, shut me down. I told her that was fine. I'd been underestimated my whole life. I could handle it. The day of the hearing, the courtroom felt hostile before anyone spoke. The prosecutor glanced at me like I was an annoyance. The judge didn't even hide his irritation. When I stood to speak, he interrupted me with a wave of his hand. "This is a courtroom, not a classroom." People laughed. I felt my face burn, but I kept going. Because somewhere between the jail visits and the library nights, fear had turned into something sharper. Focus. The prosecution's star witness was a man named Carter. Clean-cut, confident, the kind of guy juries trust without realizing why. He said he saw my dad commit the crime, said he hid terrified but memorized his face. When it was my turn to question him, the judge sighed loudly. "Make it quick." I asked simple questions: distances, lighting, times. Then I asked about his car. He hesitated. I asked again. Rental records don't lie. The courtroom shifted. You could feel it like air pressure changing before a storm. When I showed evidence that placed his rental car at the scene before and after the robbery, the color drained from his face. He stopped answering questions. Asked for a lawyer. The prosecutor stood frozen like someone had pulled the plug. The judge sat forward for the first time. Silence filled the room. Not laughter this time. Something heavier. The next morning, the charges were dropped. Just like that. The words felt unreal. My dad stood there in cuffs while they unlocked them, the sound of metal hitting the floor echoing through the room. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. The same judge who mocked me the day before cleared his throat and apologized. Out loud. In front of everyone. Cameras flashed. People cried. And all I could think was this shouldn't have been this hard. Afterward, everyone wanted a quote, a headline, a neat ending. But life doesn't work like that. My dad went home free, but shaken. Our apartment was still small. The bills were still real, but something had changed. People who used to look past us started looking twice. Not because we asked them to, but because they couldn't ignore what happened. Here's the part I keep thinking about, though. I wasn't special. I didn't have connections or money or a law degree. I had time, stubbornness, and love. And that scares me, because if I could see what was wrong, how many people never get the chance? How many families don't have someone who can drop everything and fight back? So I'll ask you what I ask myself. When have you been told to sit down, stay quiet, know your place? When did someone underestimate you so completely they didn't notice you standing up? And if you saw something wrong, something unfair, would you speak up? Or would you hope someone else does it for you? Let me know what you think. Argue with me if you want. Share a story if you've lived it. Because justice isn't just about courts and judges. Sometimes it's about the person everyone laughs at refusing to stop talking.